The fact that that might happen, you know, my feeling is the moon might be made of green cheese. It's not. It is very highly unlikely that that would actually be the situation. And we have to legislate to provide for the people, for the vast majority of people who might be disadvantaged in such a situation, not for the one possible person that may or may not ever exist.
Finally, on page 2 under paragraph 6, it says that a facility who fails to cease operations according to the plan shall result in the imposition of civil penalties, and that's on line 42. Could you tell me exactly what those civil penalties are?
I'm sorry? Okay. Those civil penalties would be determined by the Department of Health, which already has the ability to exercise civil penalties.
And do you know what the range is? Is it 100,000, a million? Is it just curious what that is?
I don't know what types of penalties they are currently in the habit of awarding, but or maybe not award is not the right word, impose. Mm-hmm. But I'm sure that the Department of Health can figure this one out.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, on the bill.
On the bill, Mr. McKevitt.
Certainly, when a person's in an assisted living facility, of course, they're usually elderly. Many times it may be not poor health, but maybe a frail health. They need certainly some care, and that's why they're in the facility. And a facility closes, you certainly want to make sure that the residents have certain rights protections so they're just not arbitrarily thrown out a few days later. My concern with the way this bill has been drafted, there are a number of situations whereby maybe a handful of people could hold up the closure facility when a facility does not have, indeed, the resources to operate on a day-to-day manner. So, again, I certainly want the intent the sponsor has for the bill. I think it is important that we have some procedures, but I do have some differences that perhaps we can maybe clarify and maybe put in some more specificity how these procedures would occur. And I would just have my colleagues consider that when voting on this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Goodell.
Thank you, Mr. Leader. Would the sponsor yield?
Ms. Simon, will you yield?
Yes.
Ms. Simon is happy to yield, Mr. Goodell.
Thank you, Ms. Simon. I had just a couple of practical questions. Many of these private for-profit assisted living residences are set up as standalone corporations to limit liability between sister corporations. So my question is, what happens when one of these private assisted living residences is facing bankruptcy? How does this bill work?
Currently, a facility could file for bankruptcy, and that would be worked out with the bankruptcy court. I would assume they would file a Chapter 11, and they would work out how they would pay their bills and what parts of their debt would be forgiven.
Under current law, if a facility is facing bankruptcy, it can close. And the purpose of this bill is to prevent that from happening until a number of things have occurred, correct?
Actually, this bill doesn't prevent a closure. It requires them to, from a statutory point of view, right now there are some regulations which are a little more loosely constructed. Currently, there is no statutory provision that requires a facility to submit to the Department of Health a closure plan. And if one is facing bankruptcy, one would believe that you would file such a closure plan in advance of the decision to file for bankruptcy. Usually, facilities have some sense of the need for that type of action and would be well advised to reach out to the Department of Health, see about closure, and find out how they could work something out to avoid closure if at all possible, and certainly to protect the residents of their facility.
So if a facility, for example, runs out of cash and they can't close under this bill without departmental approval, this bill prevents them from raising fees to bring their cash flow high enough to pay staff, right? I mean, this expressly states that they cannot raise any fees.
They can't seek to gouge from the residents, which
Well,
is a
I'm
problem.
not talking about gouging.
Well,
This says they
can't
cannot raise them at all. Am I correct?
Well, not in the process of closure. This does not say that they can never raise their fees under any circumstances. It is about the process for closure of such facilities, not about the process by which they might, under a contract that they had signed with a resident, which is usually how this happens, whether they might be able to raise those fees in some fashion and what that mechanism might be, which has nothing to do with this bill.
And if the facility does not have the cash to pay staff, who pays the staff while the facility is forced to stay open?
The facility should be working this out with the Department of Health in its closure plan. And it has a far greater ability to avail itself of resources, whether through borrowing or otherwise, or fundraising. If they are a private not-for-profit organization, they
Well, these are
often,
for-profits, right?
These
They're
are
not-
for-profit. These
they're
are
for-profits.
privately funded. They can go out to the market. They can find lots of ways of raising funds.
Thank you, Ms. Simon. On the bill?
On the bill, Mr. Goodell.
Yes.
There's a lot of great legislation that we can enact if we didn't have to deal with the financial realities of the world. In my county, I had a nursing home that went bankrupt. And they gave the 60-day notice that's required under the federal warrant statute, and they ran out of cash. They just simply ran out of cash. So what happens when a for-profit assisted living residence runs out of cash? Well, there's a suggestion that they should go and borrow the money. I got to tell you, it's tough to borrow money when you come in and you say to the bank, I'm losing money, I'm out of cash, and I'm legally prohibited from raising my prices. But that's what this bill says. You can't even raise the prices. You can't raise the rent. You can't raise the fees. You can't bring your cash flow in line with your expenses. Now, it'd be great if all the staff were willing to work for free or take a salary reduction. That's not always the case. So while I applaud the sponsor's compassion for the residents, I think we need to recognize the reality that the staff aren't going to work for free, suppliers aren't going to provide you with utilities and food and medicine and supplies, and banks aren't going to supply you with a line of credit when you're losing money and you can't raise your fees. So financial reality is something we have to recognize, and this bill flies in the face of that by saying you must stay open and you cannot raise any of your fees no matter how little cash you have. And so unless we're providing a funding source, an emergency funding source to keep these facilities open and pay the staff until their closure plan is completed, the bottom line is that checks won't clear, the staff won't be paid, they will leave because you can't force someone to stay when they're not getting paid. The staff will leave, and we'll have assisted living facilities that are open with no staff. That is not a good solution. So while I appreciate the desire to help these people, we need to do it in the context of something that's workable in the business world. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Goodell. Read the last section.
This act shall take effect January 1st.
Clerk will record the vote. Ms. Simon to explain her vote.
Thank you. This bill was born out of a shocking and abrupt decision by a developer, Hasha Deitch, to close the assisted living facility at One Prospect Park in Park Slope, Brooklyn, evicting 125 seniors, most of whom were over 85 and several in their hundreds. Prime real estate at the corner of Grand Army Plaza overlooking Prospect Park and its majestic entrance, the residents had operated as such for decades. I don't personally remember a time when it wasn't a senior residence. When Deitch purchased the property in 2006 for $40 million, he ran the facility under a temporary license for the next 8 years. In 2013, he reached an agreement to sell the property for over $76 million, and 10 months after receiving a permanent license, submitted a plan to close the facility. In the spring of 2014, the residents were told they had 90 days to get out or they would be evicted. One woman I met was 96, who had relocated from Minnesota a mere 6 months earlier, lured by the facility's advertising and the hope of proximity to her children in Park Slope. But she was lured there even after the closure plan had been submitted. But the fact that there was no notice to the residents meant that she could be hoodwinked and having to move at her age across the country. Now she had nowhere to go and no money to relocate again. And she was not the only one similarly disadvantaged. 2 years later, nearly all of the residents are gone. Only 5 women between the ages of 91 and 101 remain. They have put up with increasing neglect by the management, failing to provide air conditioning, heat in winter, hot water, and the closing of their dining and recreational facilities. Some of the residents have included Holocaust survivors, a Tuskegee Airman, and a floor full of people with advanced dementia. The passage of 0566A would keep this nightmare from happening again to others. And if I can just address a comment that was made earlier, indeed, a facility can raise the rates, but not prior to the department's approval of the closure plan. So once the department approves the closure plan, they would be able to adjust their pricing if that was needed. Thank you.
Ms. Simon, how do you vote?
In the affirmative. Thank you.
Ms. Simon, in the affirmative. Mr. Lenthal, to explain his vote.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am very puzzled by any no vote at all for this bill. And I know that there are a lot of seniors who live in our districts who have tremendous problems trying to find a decent place to live. And I'm not even talking about people who are required to go to assisted living residences because, and their problems usually stem from greedy landlords who want to make money at the expense of tenants, whatever moniker they wear, whether they're assisted living seniors living in subsidized housing or even regular ordinary folks who have to get put out. And this is, I remember during the debate in Congress over the Affordable Care Act about death panels and how this Obamacare was going to cause people to be put in the situation of being forced to die. Well, this is a different kind of a death panel. To displace seniors and displace people who are on assisted living and trying to put them in other places where they have to fend for themselves. And I am disgusted that we have even one negative vote for this bill, and I ask my colleagues to reconsider their vote and vote in the affirmative like I do.
Mr. Lenthal, in the affirmative. Mr. Mosley, to explain his vote.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to commend the sponsor of this bill. I know that for many of us, particularly in the downstate region, that we know that the fastest growing population in terms of homelessness is our elderly, followed right after that by our children. And to me, caring for an aging parent is probably the most daunting experience I've ever had to go through. And to think that there are people who will put profit over people's interests, particularly our seniors. Seniors we're supposed to be tending to, making sure that their last days on this earth are to be felt with no conflict and very little difficulty. But here is a prime example that many of us are starting to see as a pattern and practice in the city of New York, where assisted living facilities, senior facilities are being sold, being flipped, all in the effort to make profit, all in the effort to put aside the interests of seniors who need our help now more than ever. So I want to commend the advocates. I want to commend my colleague. I want to commend my colleagues who will be voting in the affirmative, because we ultimately understand that a society is going to be judged by how they treat their children and how they treat their seniors. And I want to thank the sponsor for this bill, and I vote in the affirmative.
Mr. Mosley in the affirmative. Mr. Robinson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I just rise to support this legislation, even though I have voted on it. I think that, as my colleague has expressed, how there is a preponderance of greed that's going forward within our communities in regards to people acquiring nursing homes and other kind of facilities, and seniors are being displaced. Only recently within the community that borders the district that my colleague, Assemblymember Mosley, and I represent, that a nursing home was purchased. And so some of the constituents from the district have come to say to me that I had to take my mother out of the nursing home and put her so far away. It takes me a day to go and visit to be able to be with her. There are those facilities that were located in the community where people could go and visit their families. But now the nursing homes are being gobbled up for greed. The money that's coming into the community is just, it's outrageous how people are being used as the economy of the neighborhood, and people are being displaced. I think that we must look very carefully at this. I thank the sponsor for the legislation because I know the origin of it, seeing how people were going to be displaced. And so I'm thankful that she stepped up and put this legislation in so that we can begin to look more carefully. As a result of the people trying to acquire the nursing home within the community, they found that they were liable for some other kinds of situations, not only in this community, but in other communities as well. And so we must look very carefully at what's happening to our nursing home facilities and also other facilities, because there's no housing for anybody but the rich. And we have to think very seriously about that. So with that being said, I've voted in the affirmative, and I commend the sponsor.
Ms. Robinson in the affirmative. Are there any other votes? Announce the results.
Ayes 93, noes 27.
The bill is passed.
Assembly 129, calendar number 8. Ms. Paulin, an act to amend the public health law and the environmental conservation law.
A explanation is requested. Ms. Paulin. Is she in the house? Excuse me, we need to move away. Thank you so much, Sir. I appreciate it. Proceed, Ms. Paulin.
What this bill will do would ban pesticides from summer camps and overnight camps so that they will be pesticide-free for the children who are going to those camps.
Ms. Corwin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the sponsor yield?
Will you yield, Ms. Paulin? Sponsor yields.
Thank you, Amy. Just real quickly, under current law, New York State does require registration of pesticides, so we are aware of when pesticides are being used in any instance, not just with day camps, correct?
I'm not familiar with that, but I'm assuming you're right, yes.
Okay, well, there is a section in there, so yes. Okay. Also, regarding pesticides that may have had studies showing that they are cancerous or they cause bad things to happen, those are regulated by the federal government as well, correct? There's a list of toxic chemicals that are prohibited to be used, correct?
Yes, I mean, pesticides are a bad thing, so yes, we regulate them.
Well, yes, I guess that's my point, is that some pesticides are proven to be bad, but some have not. The federal government prohibits the use of the ones that have been proven, but what this bill does, it goes beyond that and looks not just at those that have been proven to be cause bad health effects, but this goes and prevents us from using any of them.
Yeah, what it does is it aligns camps with schools where we already ban these products from schools for the same reason. So we would be banning these same pesticides that we already ban on schoolyards and we would extend that to camps where children are during the summertime.
Sure, I understand. And my reading of the bill is there's a provision to allow for emergency use of pesticides that would be determined by the local health department.
Yes,
or
if there's a local
legislature.
health department, there, and for example, there were mosquitoes, and we needed to get rid of those mosquitoes or other kinds of pests that could be dangerous, we would allow a health department to make an emergency exemption. And if a community, a county did not have a local health department, we leave that up to the state health commissioner.
Okay. Now, obviously, in the papers lately, we've been reading a lot about Zika virus. It's been happening predominantly in South and Central America. However, epidemiologists are saying that by the end of this summer, we will have that mosquito in southern New York, Long Island, New York City, Hudson Valley. Would that constitute an emergency?
Absolutely, and that's exactly why I mentioned mosquito.
Okay. So my understanding is with Zika virus, to eliminate those mosquitoes, you'd have to have multiple applications over the course of the entire season. Is this something that we would allow to happen year after year? Because obviously the mosquitoes are not going to just go away forever. They keep coming back.
Well, the Zika virus is relatively new, so hopefully we get a way to make that go away so that we wouldn't have this reoccurring problem.
Okay. Because I think back to a previous time, about 10 years ago, might have been 15 years ago, when West Nile virus was considered to be a danger like the Zika virus, and that's something that we spray for regularly now. That affects most of the state. And I would say that this bill would prevent us from spraying against that. However, it's a recurring problem that we keep having. So
I think they've found a way, just like with schools, we don't see the pesticides being used because they found alternatives and they found a way to do it at a time when those children are not using those premises. So I agree that we would want to watch out for these awful types of diseases and make sure that children aren't exposed to them. I would rather leave that to the commissioners of health to determine than automatically spraying these hazardous materials.
But aren't we actually tying the hands of local health departments? Because we're basically saying you can't use anything unless you prove otherwise. What we do right now is we're saying, okay, do what you need to do unless it's something that's proven to be bad, and then we'll prohibit it.
I think that pesticides are used too automatically, and it's better to reverse how we look at it than the current practice, which is you put the pesticide down and then look later.
Okay, thank you. Amy, on the bill, Mr. Speaker.
On the bill, Mr. Corwin.
Certainly, I agree with the sponsor that the overuse of pesticides certainly isn't good practice for children or for anyone for that fact. The concern I have is regarding some of the other illnesses that can happen if we don't use them. For example, West Nile virus. That's something that's found around livestock and animals. And I know for a fact my daughter used to do camp at a horse farm and where they sprayed regularly for West Nile virus. If they didn't do that, it would have been a tremendous hazard for the children going to the camp as well as for the animals and livestock in the area. I look at the Zika virus, which is on its way here and should be here by July, and I think we're going to have the same problem. Unfortunately, what may constitute an emergency implies that it would be a once or twice application. But with these mosquitoes, they're coming year after year after year. West Nile virus has been in New York State for close to 15 years. For those reasons, I would recommend a no vote here. I think what would make most sense is that we are judicious in terms of our study and analysis of these treatments, make sure that we minimize the exposures. However, I think it would be more dangerous to not have them around because of some of these tremendous illnesses that are happening. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Read the last section.
This act shall take effect on the 180th day.
Clerk will record the vote. Ms. Lipton to explain her vote.
My apologies, Mr. Speaker. I'm pressing the wrong.
Apologies accepted, ma'am. Are there any other votes? Announce the results.
Ayes 77, noes 38.
The bill is passed.
Assembly 2078A, calendar number 100, Mr. Zabrowski, an act to amend the civil service law.
An explanation is requested. Mr. Zambrowski. Gentlemen,
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
get him out.
This bill was drafted in response to the state of New Jersey passing a bill that restricted all employment to only residents of that state. No exemptions, every public employment position. And it put my constituents and many constituents, all constituents in the state of New York, but specifically those in border counties, behind the eight ball. Residents of New Jersey could apply for jobs in both their state and New York, yet New York residents were limited in that they could not apply for any of those jobs. It was the first of its kind. It's been on the books since 2011. I had many constituents that were obviously shut out of jobs and concerned about this. So in doing some research, we found that New York currently has a bill that responds to, in similar ways to states that have discriminatory practices against companies. And what we do is we create a list of those states and respond in kind to companies from those states. So what this bill specifically does, it empowers the Civil Service Commission to create a list of discriminatory jurisdictions and to enforce the same restrictions upon those states, thereby defending New York residents and hopefully encouraging those jurisdictions to repeal those laws and therefore put everybody on the same playing field.
Mr. Corwin,
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the sponsor yield?
will you yield, sir?
Sure, I'll
the
yield.
Sponsor yields.
Thank you, Ken. Yeah, I noticed when the first line of your bill talks about provisions related to retaliating against jurisdictions. So clearly this is meant as a retaliatory measure against New Jersey.
Yes, it's meant to. If I had it my way and could envision the future, we would pass this bill. And New Jersey, some of the legislators actually have put forth bills to repeal there, but they would go all the way past it, and we would go back to where both states have open borders and people can get jobs in this difficult economy where they're most qualified.
Okay, so I'm assuming here that you're using this kind of as a way of threatening New Jersey to bring them to a negotiating table, or are you having conversations with them in terms of trying to get them to back down?
Yeah, we first started out sending multiple correspondence to the governor and to various legislators. We never got a response from the New Jersey governor. We did actually get a response from several legislators, and we've worked well with them. I've talked to them, and I think they have seen the problems with this law. And I think one of their bills may have even gone through committee, actually passed committee, but never gone to the floor for a vote. So, look, I actually think this would be a good law to have on the books to prevent any type jurisdiction from having this type of law. But I hope by passing this bill, and hopefully if the Senate would do the same and the governor would sign it, we would finally encourage New Jersey to fully repeal it.
Okay, and you said some of the fallout from New Jersey's use of this kind of legislation. You said obviously New York residents who were working in New Jersey are no longer able to do that without moving into the state. What has been your experience with the negative fallout from that provision?
I've had numerous constituents contact my office. Some of them are first-time job seekers who apply for a job, many of them teachers, and are shut out. Other people who leave employment, who actually had jobs in New Jersey and left for a period of time. Perhaps they had children, perhaps they had a sick family member, perhaps any of the number of things that might make you leave employment, and then tried to go back and have not been able to. There is a waiver process. They've gotten better with approving some of those waivers, but still it's not 100%. So some folks are shut out of those jobs.
Sure. So are you finding that those New Yorkers who did have the jobs in New Jersey or they want jobs in New Jersey, is there an outflux of New Yorkers moving to New Jersey to take those jobs?
No, well, it's tough to say. I don't necessarily follow through with these constituents for a year or two. They contact my office. We talk about this bill. We keep in touch for a few weeks or a couple months. Send an email when we pass this, and hopefully encourage the Senate to do so. But it's not that easy to pick up and move, especially, perhaps it's getting better now, but we certainly saw a drop in the housing market, so a lot of folks perhaps are underwater or unable to sell their homes and move to another jurisdiction. So they just probably, the vast majority of them, just look for jobs elsewhere.
I see. Great. Thank you, Ken. I appreciate it. On the bill, Mr. Speaker?
On the bill, Mr. Corwin.
Certainly, I understand the motivations by the sponsor, and he's been pretty clear about what his intentions are in terms of trying to get New Jersey to roll back their provisions. My only concern here is what the fallout to New Yorkers would be in the meantime. While this bill may be first of its kind that we're experiencing, certainly we've had other jurisdictions or locations have residency requirements. I'm thinking of the city of Buffalo had a residency requirement for teachers for a while. I'm not sure if they still do or not. But my experience when I see these residency requirements is that you don't end up having more people moving into the community because they want to get a job there. If anything, you just have fewer people applying for the job because they don't want to move. So what ends up happening is you don't end up with the best and the brightest. You end up with the best of whatever it happens to be available, which is a much smaller pool of applicants than what you would have otherwise. Likewise, what could happen, and I think often happens, is when you don't have a lot of demand for that job, you have to pay more for that job to get more people to come and apply for it or to make that move. So again, I think the fallout could be the additional costs to our public jurisdictions trying to get people to be here. So while I understand this may be a negotiating tactic, I think that if this were allowed to go on long term, it could actually have a pretty negative impact on the local communities along the borders of our state. So I would recommend a no vote, and certainly anything we can do to try to help New Jersey to move along to a better understanding, I'd certainly be happy to help with those regards, but I'm not sure if this is the right way to do it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Read the last section.
This act shall take effect January 1st.
Clerk will record the vote. Are there any other votes? Announce the results.
Ayes 100, noes 15.
The bill is passed. Mr. Morelli.
Yes, sir. Do we have any further resolutions to take up?
Resolutions we have, Mr. Morelli. We'll take them up in one vote. On the resolutions, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. The resolutions are adopted. Mr. Morelli.
Yes, sir. I now move that the Assembly stand adjourned until 10:30 a.m. Wednesday, May 11th, tomorrow being a session day.
The Assembly stands adjourned.